rugae, right? We can see rugae on the slides. Here's a big rugae, kind of following it along here, kind of that big lumpy thing. I mean, they get big enough to where we actually have to move the slide to see them all, right? That big lump that we're kind of following there. That's an entire rugae. So you can see they can get pretty impressive looking, especially from a histological type view. Then you have smaller ones like this where we can kind of just move up and down and kind of see it going across there. So a little more subtle looking of a rugae. Within the rugae, you see all these kind of gaps and dips going down and then things that look like little bubbles in there. Those are going to be those gastric pits. Hanging out of the gastric pits and the gastric glands. Those are what are going to be lined with that columnar epithelial tissue, and some of those columnar cells are chief cells, some are parietal cells, and if you look closely, you'll see some goblet cells in there, kind of those mucus holding cells. Like I said, I don't like to zoom in too much, so usually I don't kind of bug you guys too much about that stuff. But it's kind of cool to see when you see them, and you'll see like once you kind of learn the difference between chief and parietal cells, which I'm not going to make you do, except for functionally different, not structurally. You'll kind of see that they're kind of regionally located kind of throughout the structures here. So all these little gaps and bubbles. So some of them look like bubbles. That's because they're opening up out here, right? We're taking these 3D bulbous rugae that you've seen in your cats and the human stomach now, right? And we're turning them into flat sheets. So these little things that look like closed bubbles, they're little gaps, just like these are out here, just they're coming out like towards us, right? So keep in mind, we're turning a 3D structure into a flat 2D thing. So it's like if somebody asked you to like draw yourself, right? You go from being this 3D structure to like this flat stick to piece of paper, right? Kind of think of it that way. You lose your dimension. And that's what's going on here, is that the stomach's losing its dimension because it's now a flat sheet of stomach tissue. So kind of moving over here, you can kind of see, obviously this is going to be all the gastric pits and gastric glands and whatnot kind of within the rugae. Then you see that thin layer of muscle kind of going along there. What's that going to be? That's that muscularis mucosa, right? Kind of marking the bottom of the tunica mucosa. So tunica mucosa going all the way through most of the rugae, right? And then coming down and becoming that thin line of muscle there. I wish I could zoom out just a little bit more, but I can't. It would make a little more sense. So that's that muscularis mucosa. Then deep to the muscularis mucosa is what? What's all this? Submucosa, right? All that connective tissue kind of right deep to it there. And I'm going to try to find a good, I know there's a good example of oblique muscle here somewhere that I found earlier. Yeah, so when we look down here, so the oblique muscle, this is the oblique right here. Let me see, force a little bit better. You can see the oblique muscle is kind of sitting up into the submucosa, right, kind of hanging out through here and whatnot. And as we kind of go down, you'll kind of see circular versus longitudinal, like right here, here's circular, and here's longitudinal. You're just kind of looking for big kind of gradient gaps kind of occurring. I could probably find a little bit of a better slide here. I'm moving around too much currently. But the oblique is going to look like it's kind of sitting in there, like I showed you the other day in your picture. And that's where I found a better spot here earlier. Kind of going on where you see the obliques kind of hanging out in the submucosa, as opposed to when you go down here and see the circular versus longitudinal kind of gradient kind of difference kind of going on there. So in order to see these the best, you really want to be zoomed out a little more. I'm kind of showing you the best I can on the TV here. But you see the outer longitudinal looking a lot different from the circular, and then as you kind of move up, you'll see the oblique kind of tearing away from the circular view. And I know you guys have some good examples of it in your tray. Here's another one where you see the oblique kind of shredded and kind of tearing apart from the circular, and then the longitudinal kind of being out from that a little bit. So on the exam, I would definitely have, you'd see oblique kind of lifting up and going into the submucosa, and then you'd see circular and longitudinal stacked on top of each other, like you're going to see in all the slides. And really kind of just needing to see the kind of the gradient difference between those two. And then lastly, the tunica externa is all this connective tissue like floating out Submucosa, just all kind of boring looking connective tissue, all packed in there like you need. So anybody have any questions? So kind of, I think the example I gave you in the extra slides is a pretty good example